I got into World of Darkness through Vampire the Masquerade Bloodlines. I remember the first time I played this game and how engrossed I got into the setting of vampires existing in society alongside us, all from different clans that had differing powers and gimmicks, such as being rebellious, artistic, or just having a very unfortunate existence, all while upholding the Masquerade, which is to say that they shouldn't tell people that they're vampires or reveal their vampiric nature, otherwise they'll be hunted by hunters. And from this game, I went off to learn about the other parts of World of Darkness, such as Werewolf the Apocalypse or Mage the Ascension, but I was a lot more interested in Vampire the Masquerade, mostly because I just really like vampires, and also because of the role that Bloodlines played to really suck me in. Wait, goddammit. Now, I don't really want to get too into the details of the development of Bloodlines 1 because, I mean, come on, you read the title of the video. Don't look at the timeline or the chapter titles or anything. Don't. I said don't! But to give a quick summary of it, the development of Bloodlines 1 had a ton of issues. Such issues it would include working with the Source engine while it was still being developed by Valve, or being overly ambitious and endlessly refining parts of the game but never really finalizing things, or not deleting parts of the game that weren't needed anymore. It got to the point where the developers, Troika Games, were told by Activision that they just couldn't keep developing the game endlessly and to just release what they had. And what they had was an unfinished game that came out in November of 2004. But even then, the game has had a ton of love from fans and has become one of my favorite RPGs of all time, one that I recommend everyone would give a go at some point. And given how much I liked Bloodlines 1, you could probably tell that I got really excited when I first saw the reveal that there would be a sequel, Vampire the Masquerade Bloodlines 2. And what was interesting to note is that Bloodlines 2 had a different development team given how Troika Games went defunct in 2005. And what's even more interesting was that the publisher was Paradox Interactive. And what I had hoped was that with Paradox's backing, the game would be able to avoid a lot of the issues that were plaguing the development of Bloodlines 1 and could also be released in a more complete and timely manner. And at some point, I started to believe that the Bloodlines name just had some curse attached to it because holy shit. So here's a quick timeline of what happened with the development of Bloodlines 2. In 2015, Paradox acquired White Wolf Publishing and were then pitched an idea for a sequel to Bloodlines by Hardsuit Labs. Hardsuit Labs were known for their game Blacklight Retribution, which was a free-to-play FPS that ended up being shut down in 2025. They also worked with other developers helping port games onto other systems such as Chivalry Medieval Warfare, which they ported to the PS4 and Xbox One. One thing to note is that they also got Brian Mitsoda as a lead writer, Mitsoda being one of the writers who helped shape the narrative for Bloodlines 1, and that's really exciting because that means that we could expect the writing and dialogue to be on par, if not better, than the writing of Bloodlines 1. Brian Mitsoda was fired from development in 2020 along with creative director Kai Clooney. Now, I won't be speculating on why they were let go given how Paradox and Hardsuit didn't really give a reason, but they were fired and my hopes for the game went from here to here. And on top of that, the game was then delayed for a later release date, which in itself isn't a bad thing, but it didn't really leave a lot of room for optimism. And that was until there was an announcement that Hardsuit Labs themselves were let go from working on Bloodlines 2 in February of 2021. Now, at this point, I just completely clocked out on following the development of this game. All I could do was see that the Steam page was still up and a game that lacked a development team. And at this point, I began to believe that this game just did not exist. And it was only until 2023 that it was revealed that Paradox got the Chinese room to develop this game. And turns out that they've been working on it ever since Hardsuit Labs were let go back in 2021. Now, I'm not too familiar with the Chinese room, but I did recognize some of their games such as Dear Esther, Amnesia, Machine for Pigs, and Still Wakes the Deep, none of which I played, but I've been told that they do create some good narrative stories, and I was willing to give their rendition of Bloodlines 2 a go. If it even exists. Now, you need to understand that I kept gaslighting myself that this game was just not real and just some hallucination. Even when it came out in October of 2025 and a few of my friends started playing it, I still told them that this game was not real, continuously gaslighting myself well after the game was released, right up until the point I started playing it myself. And if I could be perfectly honest with you, I only started playing this game because this video showed up in my recommendations, and it got me wondering, is Bloodlines 2 really worse than I thought? And I want to point out a few things. I'm not familiar with Your Favorite Son. I've never watched one of his videos before this. I don't know what opinions he holds about other games, and really, it was just a title that caught my attention. I try not to hear the opinions of other people about stuff that I plan to look at so I can form my own opinions first without having them be influenced in some way, and yeah, I did end up skimming about his video after finishing the game just to get an idea of why he didn't like Bloodlines 2, and I learned that he liked less than 10% of the game, which he said at the very beginning. So I just want to say thank you, your favorite son, for getting me off my ass to play Bloodlines 2, and I hope that you're currently playing a game where you like at least 11% of it. So here we are, Bloodlines 2 as developed by the Chinese Room, and it feels kind of surreal to be playing this, not because I've constantly gaslit myself about the game's existence, but because I know it's called Bloodlines 2, but I just cannot see this as a proper sequel to Bloodlines 1. I'm not going to be pedantic on what does and doesn't make something a sequel, but somewhere in my head I just disconnected the two games entirely, and I saw this as just another game in the World of Darkness setting. But to a lot of people, that's not the case. If you could describe this game with one word, it would be disappointing, and that would be an honest and fair description of the game. From the combat, the movement, the quest lines, somewhere it's telling you that this is not Bloodlines, and that it's not going to try and be Bloodlines, and that disappointed a lot of people. I, however, managed to avoid that because my disappointment with this game happened way back when I read that Mitsoda and Clooney were let go without any explanation, and it only got worse when Hardsuit Labs were also let go, and that could honestly explain why when I talk about Bloodlines 2, my opinion is going to sound a lot more favorable than some other people who've talked about this game. Only for some moments though. On top of that, even the Chinese Room believed that the subtitle Bloodlines should have been dropped from the game's title, because they knew themselves that it would not live up to expectations and would just upset people. But here we are with another Bloodlines game. Anyway, this has been like a kinda long introduction and I'm just done stalling. Let's get right into it. Bloodlines 2 has you take control of an elder vampire known as the Nomad, a legendary vampire to kindred who has been around since the 17th century, surviving purges on vampires by hunters as well as wars started by mortals. They've gone by many names in the past, but now in the modern day, they go by Fire, but with a PHY, and yeah, I know, it's a stupid name, Fire the Vampire, but that's the kind of campy dumb shit that I just really like, and I find it even funnier that they just took that name from some glam metal poster that they saw after waking up. So, Fire wakes up in an abandoned building and very quickly learns that they have been branded with a mark on their hand, and it's not explained as well in the game, but so has the rest of their body, and this has weakened them and their vampiric powers, and that they have a voice in their head, which shouldn't be there, which belongs to another vampire. And the vampire in our head is known as Fabian, who is a Malkavian. Wait a minute. And Fabian is about as lost as we are with this whole situation we're in. Throughout the game, Fire will be trying to understand the nature of the mark that's on them while also trying to get it removed. And at the same time, we'll be dealing with the politics of two vampire groups, the Camarilla and the Anarchs. And for those of you who don't know, the Camarilla are like this organized vampire court that's run by a prince. They have a strict set of rules and a hierarchy that needs to be followed. And then you have the Anarchs, who generally oppose the Camarilla and advocate for like vampire freedom and independence from the Camarilla. Of course, a lot more kind of goes into that, but that's just the general idea of it. At the same time, we'll also be dealing with Fabian's memories of his time as a detective and a case of a serial killer in Seattle known as the Rebar Killer, and these memories seem to be induced by this mystical being known as the Gardener. These memories also help us learn about the history of the Camarilla court that we're dealing with. Within the Camarilla's court, you have Lou Graham, the former Prince of Seattle who abdicated her position to one of her childer, J.J. Campbell, who was been killed when we start the game. Seattle is now under the control of Lou's other child, Ryong Choi, who now has to deal with the aftermath of a dead prince and the city's anarchs. We also get to meet with other characters such as Sophia, a Tremere who works as a researcher for the Camarilla, and Tolly, a Nosferatu who is the court's intelligencer. And among the anarchs, we get to meet Katsumi, who is sort of the de facto leader for one anarch group and former Camarilla member, and Max, who is the sire of the Camarilla's former sheriff. I really enjoyed interacting with each of the characters. They have been pretty interesting to talk to, and having to navigate the dialogue options has been one thing that almost got me into the roleplay aspect of what is meant to be a role-playing game, but more on the whole role-playing thing later. The recordings you see on my screen right now is of my second playthrough of the game, where I chose to play as a different clan. There's 6 clans to choose from, and at least in the tabletop, they have their own kind of gimmicks and personalities that they lean into. In my first playthrough, I was playing as a Beno Hakim vampire, who are usually seen as judges and mediators, and I roleplayed as more of a I'm the one who decides the judgment of others kind of character, which had some of the characters respond to me in a certain way. And on my second playthrough, which you're seeing on screen right now, is where I played as a Brujah vampire, and they tend to be a bit more rebellious and aggressive, and I decided to lean more into that, being more brash and aggressive in my dialogue options, and I was surprised to see that there was some slightly different dialogue responses from the people I spoke to. Now, it wasn't really that much to garner a major change, and it acted more like flavor, but was interesting enough for me. And in both playthroughs, I did try to see how different the interactions between me and some of the characters would be, and it didn't seem to be all too drastic. One to note was when I quickly tried to play as a Ventrue vampire just to see what differences there would be, and so far, in one of the first interactions I had with one of the first vampires you meet, with the former sheriff of Seattle, I was pleasantly surprised to see there were some different responses. The one that stood out to me though was one scene way later into the game where I got to talk to Ryong, and in my Banu Hakim playthrough, she asked me if I planned to stay within Seattle or if I'd go back to being the nomad and wander about. And I said I chose to stay, and she seemed a bit worried about that, almost like she was afraid of me. But in my Brujah playthrough, I told her that I planned to leave after all this was over, and she seemed upset, saying that she'd wish I chose to stay in Seattle. It's these small things that I saw on a subsequent playthrough that made me begin to appreciate the game's story and writing, and honestly, I wish we began to have a bit more of this. These kind of dialogue and political navigation sections where I had to either balance out my relationships with different factions, either siding with the Camarilla or the Anarchs more easily, but sadly, this isn't a visual novel game or a social sim. The game markets itself as a role-playing game, and while the tabletop certainly is a role-playing game, Bloodlines 2 though, I wouldn't call it one myself. If anything, Bloodlines 2 leans more into being an action-adventure game, and I'm not gonna go too much into what does and doesn't make a game an RPG, but a quick look at some of the game's mechanics and character developments points to it being less roleplay-y. Dialogue options alone a roleplay game does not make, and it's really hard to try and fit into a role in this game, even though I did say that I tried to shape Fire's character based on the clan I played, but it's kinda hard to fit within a certain role within combat. As I said, there's 6 clans to pick from in this game. You have the Banu Hakim, Brujah, La Sombra, Toreador, Tremere, and Ventrue. Each clan has their own powers you get to unlock pretty early on in the game, and each clan also has their affinities, and what this does is allow you to unlock other clan powers at a cheaper cost. Initially, you can see where each clan would have their specialization, since each of them will have their own unique passive as well, which activates by feeding on people in combat or on the streets. Banu Hakim, for example, allows them to make less noise after feeding so they can sneak up on enemies, and this leads to a more stealthy playstyle. La Sombra gets something similar, but it affects being seen rather than heard. Now Brujah, being more of a warrior type clan, instead gets increased melee damage after they feed, and Ventrue would take less damage, so you'd think they'd be more like a tank. And you'd think that Tremere would also lend to a stealth playthrough given how their passive makes the bodies disappear after feeding, but their skills have them be more of the mages of the vampire world. And Toreador gets to move faster, which is neat, but I haven't really gone around to a Toreador playthrough, so I can't really say how useful this passive is. Each clan also has a perk you get to unlock, and this isn't locked to the clan you choose. These are things such as having your clan passive activate based on a kill rather than just by feeding, regain more health by feeding, or passively recharge one of your abilities. These perks can also be used simultaneously, and it's intended to reflect the Nomad's power as part of their shtick of being this powerful elder vampire, strong enough to borrow all these abilities from these other clans, and it's also why you're able to unlock these powers from other clans as well. There's also one perk which lets you sprint while crouched, and I assume it's going to make you look like some kind of gremlin skittering around on the ground. I say I assume because this game is played entirely in first person. Yeah, that's right, while navigating throughout Seattle, as you jump across buildings and supernaturally sprint your way across, you're locked into a first person camera perspective. And I can get why, it's to make you feel more immersed into the game, to put you in Fire's shoes and all, but that stops when you enter a dialogue cutscene where you're pushed into some third-person perspective. Now, I don't really mind the first-person camera myself, but given how fast some of the movement is, some of it feels a bit clunky, and it can induce some motion sickness for people. And while I'm not somebody who gets sick from this kind of thing, it almost happens when I got to the game's combat. Combat in this game is fast, and it's almost jarring to start off with given how it's primarily melee combat, and you tend to fight these groups of enemies. It took some time for me to get used to, and one of the biggest struggles I had was the dashing, which felt like it was just too much too fast and went further than I would like, and I kept getting lost early on in the fights. What doesn't help is that there is a parry in the game, and to parry an enemy attack, you have to dash into them, which doesn't feel like a natural thing to do when it could have been a timed block or something. But what is interesting is that each clan has their own basic attack animations. I mean, it's not really that interesting, but what is neat is that Tremere gets this sort of blood slicing animation and is at a slightly longer range to kind of show off their blood magic affinity. Also, Fire has a dropkick attack, which I did try to use a few times, but it barely worked out for me. But I wanted to bring this up because the fastest way apparently to get around Seattle is by drop kicking your way down the street, which is actually kind of funny when you realize this means that drop kicking to move around isn't a Masquerade violation, but breaking out into a slightly faster sprint is. What's that? What's a Masquerade violation, I hear you ask? Well, calm down, we're not there yet. Fire also can't use ranged weapons. Well, sort of. Fire does have some telekinetic abilities and can use that to pick up a gun that's on the ground and just blow their load on someone before tossing it aside, but that's really about it, which is disappointing to say the least. Like, I know Fire is this like 400-year-old vampire, but they've only been in like torpor sleep for like 100 years and they can't just pick up a firearm and use it. You also get 4 active abilities that you could use. One is a damaging ability, one is a movement ability, and one is some sort of like mind control in a way, like taunting an enemy to get them to attack you or frighten them so that they can run away, and one is a crowd control ability that's like hitting the ground real hard to knock people down. And you can mix and match these abilities around based on what you like to use, as long as they're within the same tier, and you unlock these from your clan contacts around the city. So in my example, all the Bruja abilities came natural to me, but if I want to say unlock some more La Sombra or a Tremere's movement ability, then I would need to trade with them different kinds of blood that you drink from humans. There's 3 kinds of blood resonance, and they have their own names, but I just call them angry blood, sad blood, and horny blood. And you'll find them appearing every so often from the people walking around the streets, or you'll find them on dead enemies, sometimes like in these blood packs or as a reward from some side quests. And of course, you can't just drink this blood out in the open. The intention is to lead a person to an alleyway away from everyone else so you'll be able to drink and not violate the Masquerade. But the problem is that that's really boring, especially when they won't follow you like the people with the sad blood who'll just keep running away from you. Do I have to herd them into an alleyway like sheep? Well, turns out you don't have to do that, because I learned that you can just drink from them out in the open, and the amount of time needed to drink from these people does not come to a Masquerade breach. This is the part where you can ask what a Masquerade violation is. Well, don't bother now, you missed your chance. Masquerade violations in this game happen when you reveal your vampiric nature to humans, and they're tracked by this circle that'll come up when you do something like scale a wall, or fight in public, or that slightly faster vampiric sprint you got. And there's like 3 tiers to them. One is just people looking at you and thinking, huh, that's kinda weird. Not an issue. But when it goes to the next tier, suddenly people are afraid, and being out in the open will draw more eyes towards you. And when it turns red, the cops will be on you and you have to run away and hide, because if that red circle fills up all the way, then it's game over, as Tolly would show up behind you and stake you in the heart. Now, I don't have any footage of that because I'm just a really good vampire, but going back to what I said about drinking blood from someone in public, the timing of the drinking animation isn't long enough for a Masquerade breach. Like, it'll put you in the reds, so you do need to go and hide, but if you just run up to a rooftop and just fucking wait, well, then the Masquerade meter will slowly go down until it's green, and you can just go back down to the street level. Now, I don't like this because it makes a core part of the system feel unimportant. I mean, it's called Vampire the Masquerade, and if you can just easily violate it and wait a minute for everything to go back to normal, then it's more Vampire sometimes we mess up. You know what else is odd? Dropping from rooftops onto the sidewalk, not a Masquerade violation. And that kind of furthers my negativity towards this, because what do you mean that's just a normal thing that happens in Seattle? And I'm sorry, what's going on with these cops who see someone bite someone on the street, lose them for a few minutes, and then acts like nothing happened? Is this commentary on how ineffective the US police force is? Maybe, I don't know. The gameplay, however, isn't really what kept me going. I mean, it's alright, even though it has some issues, but what really kept me going has been the game's story and the interactions I had with the characters. And in some way, this is sort of a water is wet revelation. Game studio with strengths in narrative and storytelling wrote a story I liked. Oh yeah, big surprise. But I really feel that this is the game's strongest aspect. Now, I won't be going through the whole story because I want to avoid as many spoilers as I can, because being told a story and experiencing it are two different things, and I feel that if you are going to experience this, if you are able to and choose to, it's worth the journey. The story is told in two sections. Fire sections, which are these more action-based parts of the game where you'll be navigating around the Camarilla and the Anarchs while trying to understand the mark on you and who placed it on you. And then there's the Fabian sections where you'll be playing detective to solve murders by a killer known as the Rebar Killer. While I did enjoy playing as Fire, Fabian sections felt a lot more interesting to me, and it's mostly due to the fact that he is a Malkavian, but more on that later. I want to start off with talking about Fire's part in the story, and the focus for me was trying to navigate around the members of the court and who I would try to side with and who I can trust, and this affected how I would treat everyone. For example, when talking to Lou Graham, I would try to placate her, try to get on her good side so that she could grant me whatever blessing she has, even though I think she's an absolute monster, even around other monsters. But with Ryong, it felt like I could be a bit more direct with her, either to see how she'd fare being prince or if I could help push her into becoming a better prince. While talking with Tolly, I felt like I could be a bit more relaxed and laid back with him and drop all pretenses and just talk. And saying that out loud made me feel like that's sort of his intention with being the court's intelligencer. Sophia, however, is an interesting one, given how even as a vampire she has this air of innocence surrounding her, like she wouldn't harm another person, but given that she's a Tremere, it adds a layer of intrigue to her. If you're familiar with the clan, you'd know that the Tremere tend to keep secrets, and you'd start to wonder if she's showing you who she is on face value, or if you should stereotype her based on her clan and wonder if she's hiding something. Now, the way I'm describing everything does make it sound like it's some kind of social sim, but in reality, it's not. You got to see how the gameplay is. On one hand, it gets to me that we don't get to deal with more of this politicking, and on top of that, the story is also very linear without any branching paths. A lot of the time as Fire, you get to talk to somebody, then run off to an area where you fight enemies, and then you return back and talk some more. The first plot point of the game has you learn that the Sheriff of Seattle, Benny Muldoon, has been massacring Thin Bloods, and he's causing a problem for the Camarilla, so you go and stop him. Ideally, you'd want to bring him back to Ryong for his judgment, and also because Ryong explicitly told you to bring him in. But you could choose if you want to give him up to the Anarchs instead, so that they can punish him. Now, if you return Benny to Ryong, you get praised and are rewarded the title of Sheriff. But what happens if you give him up to the Anarchs? If you give up Benny to the Anarchs, you just get a slap on the wrist and you become Sheriff anyway. And it's not to say that the story itself isn't interesting, I just wish that we could have had more to it as well as with our dialogue options. This linearity can be more or less excused when it comes to the Fabian sections of the game, given how they're just his memories. And on top of that, they act more like interludes between each night, given how the Fire sections are the main game. Fabian sections, however, are probably the more interesting parts of the story, partly because you get to be a vampire detective, and honestly, that concept for a game is actually just really cool and makes me wish that that's what this game was about, but also because, as I said before, Fabian is a Malkavian, and Malkavians are a clan whose whole thing is vampires with mental health issues amplified to extremes, and we get to see the world through his eyes. Fabian is also quick to mention to us that his memories shouldn't really be taken at face value, that we could probably just disregard them entirely. He says this to us not because he might be hiding something, since these memories play a role in learning more about the Camarilla as well as hint to where we'll be going next, but because he himself doesn't even remember until it all comes back to him. This makes Fabian an unreliable narrator, and my favorite part of going through his memories is trying to find out what's actually going on in his head. As Fabian, you also get 4 different abilities that you can use that come from his bloodline. You get the ability to uncover clues by talking to objects, bypass stubborn people by erasing their memory, or even the ability to tap into their mind and memory to find out things that they aren't telling you. Now, his 4th power seems neat from a narrative standpoint, but not from a gameplay perspective, and that's where you make someone else see you as a different person, but you don't know who you are meant to be to them, and you have to figure that out based on the dialogue options given, and picking the wrong option just breaks the illusion. Cool concept, poorly executed. I do want to go over the first Fabian sequence though, and even though I said I want to avoid as many spoilers as I can, given how early this is in the game, I feel that it's fine talking about it in more detail, and also because this is the best way for me to show you why I like Fabian as a character, as well as his parts of the game. So it starts off with you waking up in his office, and you're told that you're given a task on the orders of Benny Muldoon, who at this time is also the captain of the Seattle Police Special Investigations Unit. Now you're told to go to investigate a disturbance reported at the Macomb Bar, and upon arriving there and speaking with the owner, Fletcher, who is another member of the Camarilla, you're told that a human woman, that's kind of strange to say out loud, you're told that a woman named Pandora has walked in saying that she was sent by her sire and is asking to speak with a real vampire. And this seems like it could end up being a masquerade breach, and Fabian has to deal with it. Now we learn very quickly that she's not going to talk to Fabian, who is actually a real vampire, so we get to use that ability he has to have her meet the person she intends to see. And with this visage, she refers to Fabian as Lord Fabian and comes to deliver a message to him: beware the sword of the cross. Investigating further, we learn that she showed up here in a limousine, which means that someone from the Camarilla did send her here, which raises the question on who her sire could be. After talking to Fletcher about this, Fabian decides to just wipe her memory of vampires and send her on her way, but upon returning to the storeroom, we find Pandora's body stabbed upon rebar that's stuck in the ground with her head ripped right off. A killing that's similar to the rebar killings of the past, and it's believed to have been done by a legendary vampire hunter named Santiago. Fabian is able to speak with the body to gather a bit more information, and one phrase mentioned by Fabian's image of Pandora triggers another memory of a similar killing in the same location 1 century ago. The interaction you get with Pandora has made me ask a lot of questions, and there are theories about what could have happened and who could have possibly killed her. And I want to talk a bit about that, mostly giving my own interpretation about this, just to show you how detailed Fabian's sections could be. And the first thing to mention is the idea that Santiago has returned to Seattle in the 2020s and is hunting vampires again. Now this doesn't seem plausible when you start to realize that he was also suspected of the same killings in the 1920s, and there's two reasons why. First off, Santiago would be human, and if he was supposedly killing vampires in the 1920s, then he would be like over 100 years old in the modern day. So chances are that Santiago is actually just dead. The other reason why Santiago is unlikely to be the killer is due to the fact that rebar has been stabbed into the ground, and something like that takes immense strength, like something more than any human would be able to have. It would take something like a ghoul or maybe a vampire to do that. And this means that we now have a mystery on who could have killed Pandora. Now keep that mystery in mind for now. Let's try to learn a bit more about Pandora and why she's calling Fabian Lord Fabian, because that seems kind of weird, because we never get to learn who Pandora's false sire is, but we know she's been talking with someone in the Camarilla, someone who'd tell her to go look for Lord Fabian and to pass on this message to him. And as you go through the game, you'll quickly learn that a lot of the people in the Camarilla don't really respect Fabian. Even members such as Sophia, who tend to be kinder to him, won't go as far as calling him Lord Fabian. So who did Pandora end up meeting? Well, I believe that she most likely met Fabian and was told to deliver a message to him for whatever reason, but how could this be possible? Well, we know that Fabian also has the ability to erase memories and to appear differently to another person. He already used the latter one on Pandora in the storeroom, so I believe that he himself has acted as someone else and boasted about himself, telling Pandora to seek out Lord Fabian, building up his own theatrics while appearing as a different person to her, and he has most likely done this again to someone associated with the Camarilla to have her be sent to the Macomb Bar in a limo. Now here's the part where it gets more conspiracy brained for the theory. Who could have killed Pandora when Fabian left the storeroom? And why did no one else in the bar hear the rebar being slammed into the concrete and a person's head getting ripped right off? So I believe that Fabian is the one who has killed Pandora. Now first off, how could he have done it without anyone noticing? One discipline that Malkavians have access to is obfuscate, and this allows the user to hide and deceive others, and one ability that Fabian could potentially have had access to, if we assume this is going by V5 rules, is a power called Silence of Death, which nullifies all the sound they make. But the bigger question is, why did Fabian have this message passed along to him, and why would he kill Pandora? And this is where it gets wild. It's to help jog his memory of a similar killing in the 1920s. And if that sounds insane, that's because it is. Like he's a Malkavian or something. There's more that goes into the story later on that I'm not touching upon, and that's because the reveal actually has been pretty grand and actually really interesting, and when you put the pieces together, this theory starts to make sense. And it's like you're being rewarded for seeing all the pieces of the puzzle being put into place as you're slowly trying to figure out just what the fuck's going on. This is why I've begun to really appreciate Fabian and his parts of the story. His characterization and all the mysteries put in place to engage you to try and figure out just what exactly is going on is just so well done and really makes me wish that this is what the game was about. Now, of course, maybe they could have put a bit more work into the gameplay portions because Fabian's sections are actually kind of dull. But Fabian's characterization might also be my favorite representation of a Malkavian I have seen thus far. This party goes back to an idea of a Malkavian someone might have if they've only played Bloodlines 1, for example. They might assume a Malkavian who is dealing with some form of insanity or mental health condition could be played in a, wow, look at me, I'm so random, I'm gonna do weird shit and talk to a stop sign, haha, I'm the Joker, baby. And this representation of a Malkavian is known as a fish Malk, which is fine, I guess, but I don't really like it. Mostly because I think that comedy wears off pretty quickly, but also because it's just not a good representation of someone suffering from a mental illness, and it just makes Malkavians more comedy relief characters. What makes a Malkavian horrifying, and keep in mind that each vampire is meant to be horrifying, they're monsters, is how insidious their insanity could be, and Fabian is amazing in that sense. Yes, I know he has his moments where he tries to be funny and has an attitude that really tries to lighten the mood, but that mostly seems to just contrast with Fire, who has more of a dark and brooding personality going for them. Fabian's insanity comes up in many ways. If you're not buying the theory that he killed Pandora just to jog his memory as evidence, then you have multiple moments where he's talking with objects who talk back to him. Well, they're not talking back to him, he's talking back to himself as the object which he decides to personify.
So, tell me, Pockets, you see anything last night?
Could be any bar in any city, but you stroll right into mine, Detective.
Guess David is a rebel.
Detective, I feel...
You alright there, fella?
Oh, hold me, Detective.
Oh, dead. Oh, well. Nice work, little buddy. Maybe I should bury you somewhere.
One of them is a filing cabinet that he follows up on conspiracy theories.
Any word on D.B. Cooper?
The usual. A fresh note from Mr. Sator filed under unverified tips.
I should get to it.
Come back when you can. I always need a good sorting.
And if anything else, he sees himself as a noir detective that's just walking around Seattle, while at the start of the game, while following his scent as Fire, we can see him scaling walls, leaping across streets and rooftops. One minor detail as well is when you leave his office in his memories, you get to see this plaque on the door showing his office location. But when you return back to the police station as Fire later on in the game, we find that that plaque is just a sticky note on a door to a supply closet. There are so many details put into the writing, and these little areas tell more of a story, and it's been great having to see them, and I love that. But you might have noticed that what I really enjoyed was not necessarily the main story of Fire and the mark on their hand, but everything in between and how each character gets to be portrayed. Now, I've already talked about Fabian, but a few that I want to mention are the Brujas you get to meet in the game, and how each of them is different from the last. Starting with Benny Muldoon, he appears to be the archetypical Bruja. He's aggressive and rebellious. One of his lines is even, "Fuck the prince, fuck the Camarilla," and I wouldn't blame you if you assumed him to be an anarch even though he's still the sheriff of the Camarilla. Now, of course, most Bruja tend to be anarchs because of that rebellious compulsion, but when you meet Katsumi, another Bruja, things tend to be not so black and white. Katsumi used to be a member of the Camarilla when Campbell was prince, but her outspoken opinion to not massacre Thin Bloods is what caused her to be forcibly removed from the Camarilla and why Campbell branded her face. Now, Now later on we learn that she's still working alongside Campbell and the Camarilla even though she's an Anarch leader, and this gives off the impression that she doesn't necessarily believe fully in the Anarch cause and that her opinions on Thin Bloods and the safety of Kindred in Seattle take precedent over any feud with the Camarilla. Another interesting Brujah you get to meet is Max Weber. Now Max is Benny's sire, though it often gets confused in-universe that it's actually the other way around, where people think Benny is Max's sire. And when you meet Max, you get to see why. Here is a young man who is rather timid and calm, not usually typical of a Brujah, and this guy's child is a guy who's out there killing Thin Bloods, and this has an amazing contrast to Benny as well as to other Kindred, and it's that we can't just take everything on face value. If we have a Brujah here who isn't acting like how we'd expect a Brujah to act, then who else could we meet? Now of course some of them fit their clan stereotypes. Lou Graham, for example. Lou Graham is a Ventru, and Ventrus feel the need to lead and to climb the ranks. It's the clan of kings. But what's odd is that Lou Graham used to be prince and she abdicated her position to somebody else. But she abdicated her position to her childer, first Campbell and then to Ryong, which leads you to wonder if she's really given up her power or if there's something more. And it's obvious there's something more. I mean, the current prince is her own child, and there have been moments in the game where they had to go consult with Lou about things. So Lou seems to be rather predictable, but some characters are multi-layered, and sometimes I wish we got to explore them on a more deeper level, and that is where the strength of Bloodlines 2 lies. Also, I just want to throw in this line that Fabian has at the beginning of the game. This kind of just sold me already on the writing.
I see. Will guns be a common threat?
In America? Yeah.
But I want to say that just because I like the story and I think the gameplay is alright, it doesn't mean I think this game is on the upper levels of being a good game. There's obvious issues with it, and I haven't really touched upon them yet, and these are things that I think that should be talked about. For example, even though I praise the writing of Fabian's Memories, his gameplay is just really dull. There's a lot of walking around and dialogue options where you would just essentially need to pick the correct one to move on. It's the closest the game comes to being considered a walking sim, having to go back and forth at times just to drink from Fabian's human contacts around the city just to recharge his powers. Speaking of which, the Seattle map isn't too interesting or exciting either. Walking around as fire, the city feels lifeless, which seems fitting for a vampire game, but it doesn't really make for a good open world free roaming game. The NPCs just walk around doing nothing of note, and the ones who have resonant blood in them will either just be aggressive while standing still or trying to carjack or spray paint, but none of it really tends to stand out. Even with Fire's movements, the city itself doesn't look all too interesting. It looks very samey apart from a few landmarks such as the cathedral in the center or Weaver Tower on the edge of the map. What would have been interesting to see would have been different districts of Seattle, each with its own identity, if only to have the city stand out a bit more. On top of that, the buildings you can enter is really only a handful of them. Apart from the ones you go to only once for the story, a lot of them have your clan contacts in there, but you really can't do much of anything else inside these places. And your contacts themselves don't play a major role in the story as I hoped they would have. It's not that they have no role entirely, they have some parts here and there in Fabian sections, but they barely do anything in Fire's. They do offer you side quests, and those quests are really boring. 3 of them are collectathons. One has you look for 9 crosses around Seattle, and they're all located in these vampire havens, so it's not too difficult to find them. One has you scour the city to find 30 Anarch symbols painted on walls, and later in the game, you get asked to destroy 30 cameras around the city. Now these count as side quests. It's not good. Your Toreador, Ventru, and Brujah contacts don't offer much, but your Benu Hakim, La Sombra, and Tremere contacts give you multiple side quests to do. They're not much better. Your Tremere contact asks you to perform these fetch quests, either delivering something to someone or getting something for her, and it's not that special at all. Your Benu Hakim contact asks you to go and perform what you can argue as judgment, and it's just an assassination contract with the optional objective of not breaking the Masquerade. But excuse me, why is that optional? Again, the name of the game is Vampire the Masquerade. It's in the fucking title. But what about your La Sombra contacts? They ask you to go and hunt down other vampires, which just feels like what the Benu Hakim contact asks you for, but with a different coat of paint. And I've done all of them because I want to get some of the rewards to either grab new powers or to get a reward of resonant blood. And you know, I got 2 more problems to talk about, and it's that these clan contacts do have their own stories and backgrounds. But it's not as obvious as you might think. They have different dialogue options, and when you exhaust them, they get new ones each night, and it took me being on my second playthrough to realize this, because initially I just thought, why should I keep talking to them? These options all seem to be really similar. Turns out, they're not. The owner of the Macum bar, for example, Fletcher, is the one who asked me to go and collect the Anarch symbols, and I found out that these symbols were painted with his own blood. If you talk to him each night, you get to learn that he was once tricked into giving up some of his blood, and somebody used blood sorcery to bind him to this bar, preventing him from leaving. That's such an interesting bit of detail about him, and I never got to find that out my first time because they didn't make it obvious that you can just ask them each night. I had no reason to go back to him. I got his quest done and I unlocked all my Ventrue abilities. Why would I keep talking to him? How would I know to go back night after night just to learn more about him? Also, you can romance your contacts, but it all comes down to some fade to black screen where there's some corny dialogue, and I don't know if you're doing the deed or just sucking each other. No, wait, if you're drinking each other's blood, but it doesn't really give you much. I am, however, glad that this game lets us bang an old lady for once in one of these fucking RPGs, but if you ask me, I'd rather romance somebody like Lou Graham, because if there's something I want, is to have some rich, powerful woman use me and then toss me away. The other problem I have is that the clans don't have much in the way of identity when it comes to fire. Sure, you can have the one clan dialogue option here or there, but nothing really stands out. Nothing really changes how you'd play one clan from another, apart from maybe your own clan passive, given how you're able to mix and match all of your abilities. Now, what the tabletop game has for each clan is a Bane and a Compulsion. Banes are a clan's weakness, things like a Ventrue throwing up whenever they drink the blood of a McDonald's employee, or a Benu Hakim that just can't stop sucking. I have a problem. And Compulsions are what each clan strives to do, such as a Bruja rebelling or a Tremere being a perfectionist. None of these appear in this game to help cement Fire's clan identity. Now, to be fair, Bloodlines 1 didn't have clan compulsions either, but it did have some Banes, and it would have been nice to have those in Bloodlines 2 as well. I should point out that while I was writing the scripts for this video, the game was updated with the release of its first major DLC, and this changed certain main story quests to become side quests, and melee combat did receive some updates. And in terms of side quests, the Benu Hakim and Tremere contact quests have become clan exclusive, which I think is an alright change, but I don't know how the main story flow would be now that the main story quests that I did play before are now considered side quests, some of which I feel that should stay for the main story instead of being a side quest given how much information they add. I do plan to talk about the DLC in a later video along with some of the updates, and you might be wondering, why are you doing this to yourself? First of all, thank you for asking, thank you for caring about my well-being, that means a lot, but I'm doing this because I want every achievement in this game, and turns out that they need you to beat this game 6 fucking times, because there's an achievement for beating the game with each clan and an achievement for getting all 6 endings. Fucking why? God, I hate this. I hate this so much. Jesus Christ. I'm normal, I'm fine. This is a punishment of my own doing. I'm doing this to myself. No one else is forcing me. The only person who can save me is myself. And at some point, I started to wonder, what was it about the first Bloodlines game that was so well loved by so many people that made Bloodlines 2 worse in comparison? What secret formula was there in the first game that just made Bloodlines 2 more, let's just say, disliked by people? So I went back to replay the first game. Vampire the Masquerade Bloodlines is a broken mess of a game that feels like it's held together by duct tape and dreams, and goddammit, it's one of my favorite RPGs of all time. You play as a vampire that's been recently turned and introduced to a world of darkness. What am I writing in this goddamn script? Where you learn that vampires and other supernatural creatures exist beneath the surface, and in some instances, that's more literal. The vampires have to keep the secret that they, the vampires specifically, don't exist, which they call the Masquerade. And you'll be traveling around Los Angeles as you become embroiled in vampire politics, hunt an ancient relic, and melee combat, which ends up being a slap fight until one of you dies. This game has a good amount of jank to it, and that just adds more to its charm. The game has been plagued with technical issues where it can't even run on modern hardware. You need to download an unofficial patch that is still updated and maintained to this day to be able to run the game. But technical issues and jank aside, this game was heavily well received due to its writing, story, the characters you meet, and you might have even heard the term flawed masterpiece when being used to describe the game. Some parts of it haven't aged well, like at all,
Welcome to Sang's Herbal Remedies. I am Sang. How may I assist you?
such as some dialogue options being unnecessarily misogynistic and a lot of prominent female characters tend to be more sexualized. Now that's not really a problem for me. I mean, if you want to make the vampire sexy, make the vampire sexy, but make some of the men sexy too. But I think the most egregious choice was having a whole area of the game where the Asian characters speak with this racist Asian accent. Like, yeah, that was, sure, a choice. It's things like this that really shows the game's age. Well, that and this Lacuna Coil poster. You can really tell this game was made back in the 2000s. Like, do people remember Lacuna Coil? They had a song back in Guitar Hero 3, and that was my first experience with their music. Wait, hold on. Holy shit, they're still going, goddamn. Hey, if there are any Lacuna Coil fans out there watching, let me know in the comments if their recent stuff is good and worth a listen. But despite all of Bloodlines' jank and poorly aged sections, this game still remains one of my favorite RPGs, and one that I recommend everyone play at some point. But I'm here to tell you that my rose-tinted glasses have cracked slightly on my replay of the game. Now don't misunderstand me, I still really like this game, but I've begun to see the cracks on my most recent playthrough. And that's what I intended with this section, a more brief retrospection of Bloodlines 1, with Bloodlines 2 kept in the back of our minds, because if this game is that much better than Bloodlines 2, then let's find out why. Bloodlines 1 has you take on the role of a newly embraced vampire who is being introduced to the world of the supernatural while doing the biddings of the Prince of Los Angeles, Sebastian LaCroix. You'll be traveling through Los Angeles from Santa Monica to downtown LA to Hollywood and Chinatown, as you'll be tracking down an ancient sarcophagus that is believed to house an antediluvian in torpor. Sort of like an ancient vampire, like a super ancient vampire, a clan founder at that. And I'm going to be blunt about this, I'm not a fan of the main story here. This is not that exciting. It's not to say it's not good, it's just not exciting. But how could it be unexciting if you're dealing with the supernatural parts of life that have been hidden away up until now? Well, that's because that's all you get with the main quest. You get shown a world of vampires, then you get told that ghosts are real, you deal with a sarcophagus that may or may not have an ancient vampire in it that'll bring about the end times. You get to kill zombies in a graveyard, find weird flesh creations, learn of a whole other group of vampires called the Kuei Jin, who are not really vampires, but they're sort of like the vampires of East Asia, but like you take all the East Asian cultures and you sort of like mix them together without any rhyme or reason of their history, relations, culture compared to one another. It becomes a bombardment of, hey, check out all this stuff in the setting with no real intrigue into the connections of all these vampires, and that doesn't really grab my interest as much on subsequent playthroughs. But what I can say does add to the game's replay value is that the clans you can choose to play as, and each clan feels more unique and interesting to play given how they have their own powers and starting stats along with their own downsides. Toreador, for example, gain double the amount of humanity based on choices made, but they also lose double the amount of humanity, whereas Tremere get access to their blood magic, but their physical stat can't go above a 4. And then you have Ventru, who can use their dominate ability in dialogue checks, but they'll throw up when they suck on a homeless person. I need to stop writing these lines. Each clan ends up feeling unique, and the stat sheet allows for a more personalized character development that helps fit the gameplay for the clan you choose as well as your own personal playstyle. You're able to invest in using firearms or going with bare knuckles. You can invest in dialogue options such as persuasion or seduction to help with your conversations. You can become a tank and reduce the amount of damage you take, or you can invest into being a lot more stealthy, and this is what has been missing from Bloodlines 2 that stops me from looking at it as a proper role-playing game. Not to mention that if you choose to play as a Malkavian or a Nosferatu, you're gonna have a completely different experience from the other clans. Nosferatu, being the walking Masquerade violation that they are in this rule edition, have to play the game as one long stealth game, never really walking openly out in the city streets with other characters acknowledging how you look, while Malkavians will just get direct story spoilers in their dialogue options and a wide range of different interactions and responses that the other clans will never get. In my latest playthrough, I chose to play as a gangrel, mostly because I never really played them before and I wanted to do something different from my usual Tremere run. Now, I usually tend to ranged combat in the past, but this time I wanted to invest into Brawl, which is your unarmed fighting, and that pairs really well with the unique gangrel power of Protean, which gives you claws for more damage, and at max level allows you to turn into this wolf monster for more damage which scales off of your Brawl skill. Now, I liked it. It was fun to do something different and to try a different playstyle, until I got really tired of how Brawl played and just the utter jank that is this game's combat. Like, there's a reason you would probably lean into using ranged combat more often, because pointing and shooting isn't isn't that much of an issue, but when a third of your melee combo just ends up missing, it becomes more frustrating to use, and I got so tired of using Brawl that it just stopped being fun, and by the end of the game, I was just too tired of the loop I put myself in that I began investing into range attacks just to get to the end. And you can tell that if you invested in range attacks, it was just the better way to play, and it started to feel a whole lot easier for me and a whole lot smoother when I did put my points there. But even though the combat left me bothered and the main story was about as engaging as insert simile here, don't forget, there's still a lot to love about Bloodlines 1 that made it the cult classic that it is. Of course, there have been moments in the main story that stuck with me, such as when a group was experimenting to find out what does and doesn't work on vampires, or even the moment of finding out that ghosts do exist, which leads to an unexpected horror segment of the game that did unnerve me on my first playthrough. But a lot of what I did end up remembering and looking back on more are the side quests that you complete, and a lot of it comes down to the older design of the game, where you need to rely on information told to you by people and journal entries to figure out where to go, rather than just some compass or guide pointing you in that direction. And each side quest also feels more unique and impactful, and I can distinctly recall them in more detail than the main story. For example, one of the side quests early on in the game allows you to just trick a Thin Blood into buying random junk off of you, such as chewing gum to help with the fangs, or a unicorn blood transfusion to help stop the transformation of becoming a proper vampire and just try to revert back into being a human. And this all ends up with him running off to try and kill the head vampire to save the other Thin Bloods. And I told him to go kill Sebastian LaCroix, and he just ended up in Sebastian LaCroix's office, dead on the ground. Another side quest that stuck with me is a scriptwriter in Hollywood who is writing a movie about vampires, and it reads strangely close to how the Camarilla and clans work, and this could be a Masquerade violation of someone feeding him information and you have to deal with that yourself. Or this one side quest in Chinatown where you have to go between two old men who used to be assassins trying to get you to kill the other so they can get a bunch of money that they can share with you, and each guy tries to make the other person sound worse each time while giving you a larger cut of the money. And not to mention that there's so many characters that you get to talk to and interact with that just stick with you, even if it's for a single quest or interaction. You'll talk to vampires such as Nines Rodriguez, the leader of the Anarchs in California, or Damsel, who was another Anarch, or even Smiling Jack, who is voiced by John DiMaggio, or even Sebastian LaCroix, who is there, and a cast of humans you get to talk to as well with about as much personality and staying power as these vampires like Knox Harrington, Officer Chunk, or my personal favorite, Fat Larry.
I am the proprietor and salesman of the month several years in a row. The ladies call me, oh God, but you can call me Fat Larry with a F-A-T, cause I know I got a weight problem, I just don't give a f.
There are some issues I have with how some characters are written in the game, and I've already mentioned how in Chinatown the Asian characters are written and spoken like stereotypes. But I also want to mention that the writing for the women in the game hasn't really aged all too well either. Not all of them, but a majority of them have been written with their backstories revolving around being women and aspects of femininity and sexuality, and it's one reason the only female character I mentioned has been Damsel and not someone like Velvet Velour or the Vorman sisters, where even though I do like them as characters, Damsel is really the only one that has stuck out to me. But on top of all that, with the writing and the dialogue and the characters, you also have two mechanics to work with: upholding the Masquerade and maintaining your humanity. And if you violate the Masquerade too many times, you end up with a game over, and unlike Bloodlines 2, you don't wait for the Masquerade to just recover on its own. You have to try and fix it with future choices you're given. You also have to maintain your humanity, because if that gets too low, then you give in to the beast and that's another game over. And these two go hand in hand, because if your humanity is low, then it's a lot easier for you to enter into a frenzy where you lose control of your character and go on a rampage, and this can very easily lead to a Masquerade violation. And sometimes you might have to make a choice to either uphold the Masquerade and sacrifice some of your humanity, or vice versa, and this balancing act makes certain choices later in the game far more interesting. The thing is, the reality is that Bloodlines 1 is flawed in its own way, and that needs to be acknowledged. I can't sit here and just ignore parts of Bloodlines 1 and my critique of it while I have given my own critique of Bloodlines 2, and I did mention a few things, but it goes a bit more into that. And if I want to be fair, then I have to give some comments about issues that exist in Bloodlines 1. I've already mentioned the jank combat and how uninteresting the main story is, but what I didn't mention was just how linear the main story actually is. The story of Bloodlines 2 is already pretty linear, and no matter what dialogue options you pick or what choices you make, certain plot lines are going to happen. You'll always be made the Sheriff of Seattle after Benny, and you'll always work with a Camarilla even though there'll be some slight dialogue changes. Characters will talk to you in the same way, and the plot progresses in the same way regardless of the choices you make. One choice that seems to be a major decision in the late game doesn't even happen until the ending cutscene right before the credits, and you just have to wonder, was there even a point to this? But Bloodlines 1 has the same issue. You'll always be working for LaCroix, and you can't deviate from the main story in major ways. At one point, after completing a side quest for Damsel, I picked a dialogue option to ally myself with the Anarchs, pledging myself to them, and I was told to keep working for LaCroix, but this time I'm a man on the inside. So I still did the same quest lines as previous playthroughs where I didn't side with the Anarchs, but now after certain points in the game, I could tell Damsel what LaCroix had me do and what he wants. But the part that really showed how linear this game was is after LaCroix told me to look for the Malkavian Primogen in his manor. At the start of the mission, you'll see Nines. Well, Nines, if you know, you know. You'll see him leaving the manor, and he'll tell you that you should leave too. When you find the Malkavian Primogen, you'll find his skeleton on the bed, and you can assume that it was Nines who killed him. When you return to LaCroix, the game forces you to tell him that you saw Nines Rodriguez leave the manor before you found the Primogen dead on his bed. So here I am, an Anarch working for LaCroix against my will, seeing the leader of my group walk out of a manor acting strange, and I have to snitch on him even if we have our doubts on what's even going on there. And this always leads to a blood hunt on Nines, and the Anarchs being upset with us for saying that Nines killed the Malkavian Primogen. The only time the game offers variation in the plot beats are at the end of the game, where you choose who you side with, whether you choose to side with LaCroix, the Anarchs, the Kuei Jin, or no one at all. But what does this change? Well, it changes which bosses you fight at the end. If you side with the Kuei Jin, then you won't fight their leader, and honestly, that fight sucks. Shit fight, hate it. If you side with LaCroix, then you won't fight his sheriff. If you side with the Anarchs or no one, then you have to fight both the leader of the Kuei Jin and LaCroix's sheriff. And I did mention how some of the writing hasn't really aged well, but after a while, I've just not been too fond of the Malkavian dialogue choices in the game. I've mentioned what a fishmouth is before, and the player character of Bloodlines is definitely just that. A lot of the dialogue options and choices are this wacky variation of the regular dialogue lines, and yeah, I still think they're funny, like when you can argue with a stop sign, or hold a conversation with a news anchor on the TV, or even the line, "So, Trip is your name and drugs are your game?" But in a way, it kind of makes it seem that Malkavians are meant to be more comical, especially given that the strongest armor for the male Malkavian player character is a rave outfit of a fur coat and a floppy top hat. And a Malkavian player also contrasts with that of other Malkavians in the game. The Vorman sisters are Malkavians, and they don't talk the way you do. Neither does Alistair Grout, the Malkavian Primogen you're sent to go look for. In fact, his tape recordings have this more somber tone to them, with lines that aren't at all like the Malkavian player character, and it feels more unsettling to listen paired with the strange layout of the mansion, which leads to what is essentially an underground asylum. Meanwhile, the culmination of the Vorman sisters questline leads to the reveal of their dissociative identity disorder, and just the horrifying story of how it all came about. Brian Mitsoda was the one who wrote the Malkavian player dialogue, and even he said when it came to writing the Malkavians for Bloodlines 2 that he wanted to avoid writing them as wacky, and I'm kinda glad that that was the intention when he was working on Bloodlines 2 before being let go. And a lot of the issues also come about from the unfinished nature of the game and the state that it was released in, and these limitations really begin to show as you progress further into the game, where it feels like the early to mid game feels vast and varied, and as soon as you get closer and closer towards the end, you're starting to see more of the bare bones structure of the game when you're focusing entirely on the main story. The late game side quests are also given to you through emails sent to you rather than through dialogue, and it begins to feel a bit impersonal at that point. One of the reasons this game is able to be played today is thanks to the unofficial patch of the game, which fixes fundamental issues to even make it playable on modern hardware, and the fact that the patch exists and gets updated to this day alone shows how much this game is loved and appreciated. And there's also the addition of the Plus patch, which adds even more changes and more content to the game, with a whole quest appearing in the late game. But there's one thing that this patch also adds, and it is a skip to an entire level of the game. After Hollywood, you'll be looking for the Nosferatu in the sewers, and that level just sucks. Having to go through that area, it's really boring, there's a lot of back and forth, and the monsters you fight down there aren't really fun to deal with, especially with the build I was playing with my gangrel. So I'm kinda glad that this skip exists, and honestly, I feel this kind of shit level design might also just be more indicative of games back in like the early to mid 2000s, because I remember Dragon Age having something similar with the Fade and the Deep Roads levels back then, then, and people made mods just to skip those areas. When it comes to critiques and criticism, I never wanted to be seen as an excuse to just shit on a game like that. Yes, games that have issues and are poorly received will be criticized more, but a lot of the critique from me is where things could improve, and at the same time, I want to point out where the positives are in them, while at the same time critiquing a game that's generally well liked and has received better reception shouldn't be seen as arguing that this game is bad, because that isn't critique. My intention here is to point out what I like and what I don't like, and that's what I try to do with these two games. Two games that I like, but for very different reasons, and I just wanted to see what their strengths and weaknesses are. What I liked in Bloodlines 1 isn't there in Bloodlines 2, but what I liked in Bloodlines 2 wasn't there in Bloodlines 1. And eventually, I did read how others felt about Bloodlines 2, and on some levels, I kind of agree. Bloodlines 2 has its issues, it has problems, and it isn't on the same level as Bloodlines 1, but it's not a game without its merit. But I feel like a lot of people look back on older games they like with more rose-tinted glasses, because in reality, Bloodlines 1 is a flawed game, and any sequel is not gonna live up to it. It was always gonna be disappointing in one way or another, and I even believe that if we got the release that Hardsuit Labs wanted to make, I'm certain somewhere there'll be people who will be disappointed that it doesn't live up to the legacy of Bloodlines 1. And on some level, I can't even fault the Chinese room for this, given how they've had to work on a game using whatever was left behind by Hardsuit Labs. And again, they didn't even want to call this a Bloodlines game because they knew it was never gonna live up to it, and that's what hurt Bloodlines 2 the most, the name. Because if this game was called something like Vampire Masquerade, The Great Seattle Fire, Vampire the Masquerade Nomad, or something like that, it wouldn't have sold well, but it would have been better received. This game was never going to live up to any expectations held from the original Bloodlines, and the signs were plastered right in front of us. Ever since they let go of key people working on the game to the moment they announced that Hardsuit themselves were being let go, at this point, anyone who had hoped for the game to come out to their expectations were setting themselves up for disappointment, and from my own standpoint, with all the information that I saw, a lot of this ends up falling on Paradox as the main root of the issue here. Something I didn't mention is that for Bloodlines 2, Toreador and La Sombra were going to be locked behind paid DLC, and given how much DLC Paradox seems to love to make for their games, such as Crusader Kings, I'm willing to assume that this was a publisher decision, but I'm willing to accept that I'm wrong if that's the case. And the entire time I was looking at Bloodlines 2, I wasn't looking at it as a successor to Bloodlines 1, nor was I getting myself excited for it after everything. I was looking at it in its own right as its own thing, and that's why I feel like I'm one of the few people who probably really like this game. It was an experience to go through, and I wanted to give it my time to look in a bit deeper, and what I found was a fun Vampire the Masquerade story to go through, and I'm fine with what I ended up getting. And Vampire the Masquerade isn't just Bloodlines, there's plenty of other games to explore in the setting, from the tabletop rules to the other games made by other developers that was met with a varying range of success. We had Vampire the Requiem, old ass game that I haven't played yet, but maybe one day. The visual novels like Coteries of New York, and there was also Swan Song, a game where I read that it's better to have a spoiler-free guide when playing, so take that as you will. And there's also, well, there was Blood Hunt, the fucking battle royale game that didn't really take off, which servers just shut down in like April, so I don't know why I'm including that one. There's a whole lot of Vampire the Masquerade games out there to explore that's not just Bloodlines, with more coming as well. But Bloodlines is just the most mainstream, so of course more people will be talking about it. More eyes will be on it, and more people will be there to make videos talking about the failure of Bloodlines 2, even though it's just an okay game with issues that kinda leads me to my final points. Now, the irony is not lost upon me when I tell you that the opinions of YouTubers and people online in general don't really matter as much, mine included. Sure, it can help to inform you about a piece of media and give you an idea if it's going to be something for you or not, or even tell you about a part of the writing or story that you might have missed yourself, but it's not something that should be taken as gospel. You have to remember that this whole video came about because of a recommendation I got on YouTube. Bloodlines 2 was worse than I thought. I'm sorry, but what I thought was that the game, with its shit development news, just didn't exist. I already had zero expectations for it. What's worse than zero expectations? And before you say anything, existence is not a predicate. Immanuel Kant said that. Learn your fucking philosophy. What's been getting to me, however, has been this hyperbolic mindset that's been ingrained in online discourse about media these days, where if something is not good or amazing, then it's shit, and it'll have no redeeming qualities to it in the eye of the beholder. And that is such an ass way to look at things, because it stops things from being just okay okay. Something being fine or mediocre is not a sin, and this mentality creates a binary look at media that takes away aspects of nuance and critique, and this is something to move away from, especially as a viewer where we might look for things to confirm our bias as opposed to looking for opposing views, and this is another thing we have to be aware of in ourselves. Ultimately, if you didn't like Bloodlines 2, that's fine, but ask yourself if you just didn't like it and are being overly harsh about it, or just disappointed with the end result. Anyway, I just want to say one last thing about Vampire the Masquerade, and it's that I think some Nosferatu should be allowed to walk around in public. Someone like Tully here, for example, just looks like a person who's been disfigured, and I think it's fine if he's seen in public. No one's going to look at Tully and be like, oh god, that's a vampire. But then you got someone like Willem,